Hello everyone. Welcome to the Ocean Sound Storytelling Channel. I am the storyteller, and today I am so happy to be with you. You may be curled up under a blanket or listening with your ears on a soft pillow. Wherever you are, whatever the time, thank you for being here. Before we begin with an interesting story, please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel, so I know you enjoy relaxing moments like this. Where are you from? Send me a little hello in the comments. I would love to know which corner of the world you are listening from. Now, relax your body. Close your eyes and let the gentle waves take you into a gentle story, a little strange, a little mysterious, but warm enough to lull you to sleep all night long. So, are you ready? Tonight's story begins. A thin tether of domesticity. My new wife adopted a rescue dog that came into my surgery for a simple vaccination. Typically, I try to keep a professional distance, but she fell in love with the shaggy mutt, and I was trying to be a good father to her son, little Nate. She called the dog Catch. What fun it was to make catch fetch. Fetch catch, fetch catch. It was a big tease. Faking throw ball. Making that big dog lope about looking for the ball. And one day, my stepson joined in the fun. Fetch catch, he cried, swinging his arm in that clunky toddler way. Catch followed the arc of the make-believe ball through the air, but suddenly something snapped in that canine mind, and the thin tether of domesticity severed when the dog realized it had been fooled by a small boy. Every dog is a wolf. Nate, a naked ape, didn't have a chance. I am a vet, and normally I am unaffected by blood and suffering. But this was different. My new wife lost her mind. And in that moment, I operated on a primal level of panic. I wrapped the gore in a plastic shopping bag and rushed Nate to the hospital, where the ER doctors stitched up his torn face like a patchwork quilt. But they were unable to reattach Nate's mangled arm. If only I'd been a few minutes earlier. If only I'd packed the arm in ice. I am a veterinarian, for God's sake. I am also a goddamned fool. I got back to the house that night, and first thing, I dragged the dog out behind the shed. The dog was innocent, I suppose. It was my new wife that brought the brute into our lives. Pitiful yellow eyes, whimpering remorse, the dog crouched low, and I blew its sorry brains out with my hunting rifle. Grief swells until it shrouds the entire universe in gray. Then it shrivels down to its hard black core and buries itself in your heart, where every other beat is a pulse of anguish. With grief comes anger, blame, and remorse. My new wife was a mess. The wounds healed, but Nate's face was puckered by scar tissue into a permanent rictus of surprise, and the shocking angularity of his right shoulder was a constant reminder of horror and loss. I spent a fortune on plastic surgery, which moderated the facial disfigurement so that Nate could move around in public without attracting too much attention. And when Nate was old enough, his prosthetic limb, the training wheel arm, was upgraded to a sleek, robotic carbon fiber contraption that he controlled by twitching the muscles in the shoulder. He was a passable imitation of a teenager, but joy and hope seemed absent. Sports and clubs and friendship too. He spent hours alone in his bedroom. The one-armed boy, her damaged son. Nate's mother was immobilized by grief, which soon turned to irreversible and ever-deepening depression. She grew thin and weak, listless and atrophied. Her face became an ashen mask. She became a passenger, a burden, useless to me. And she avoided the boy. She couldn't bear the sight of his missing limb. She couldn't bear the daily reminder of her terrible error. Finally, with her maternal and spousal duties fully abandoned, she one day went to collect the mail from the mailbox at the end of the driveway and never returned. Months later, her skeletal remains were found by a road cleaning crew on a quiet stretch of I-95. In her pocket, they found a picture of little Nate, pre-accident, still precious and whole, with his right arm draped over the neck of the dog. Madeline Marks, a comely senior at the high school, invited Nate to the school prom. It was an improbable match, but I was desperate to see Nate achieve a modicum of happiness, independence at least. So I said a little prayer and hoped for the best. Perhaps she was one of those do-good angels who tried to make everyone feel included, or who are blind to disablement. But something felt wrong. The children at Nate's school were relentless bullies, tortured Nate with minor humiliations. My suspicions were substantiated later that night when Nate returned home early, alone, in tears. He was carrying his prosthetic arm like a piece of salvaged wood. It was covered in filth and looked badly damaged. His jacket sleeve was torn. Someone had ripped the prosthetic limb from its exoskeletal shoulder mount. I intercepted Nate, got a slice of the tawdry story out of him before he stormed up to his bedroom and slammed the door. Evil sometimes wears a pretty face. Nasty Maddie, bad girl Maddie. I ask you, as a man, what would you have done? From grief to anger, from anger to vengeance and retribution. We are talking of a short journey. The next day, Maddie's mother phoned and screamed groundless accusations at me. Where was Maddie? What did Nate do to her precious daughter? Nate was a schemer, a druggie, a weirdo, a monster. I was worse. I created the monster. It was true. This was as much my fault as anybody's. As a father, I was a failure. Not that I ever wanted the role. The police arrived with a warrant. They confiscated Nate's computer, and they asked him a lot of questions, which caused the scars on his face and neck to flare up bright crimson with suppressed shame and rage. The police were persistent. This strange-looking boy with the disfigured face and the articulated claw hand was their prime suspect. But Nate knew nothing. Maddie left him and went off with an older boy. She was probably on the lam in Augusta or Portland. It was a lewd prank to impress a clique of friends. It was a high school hazing, a warped Stephen King dare. Onlookers, teen boys and girls, laughed at Nate as he tried to pull the prosthetic from out of the toilet bowl, where Maddie's boyfriend had jammed it into the trapway. Nobody helped. The police detective, a pit bull man, took notes. A prank would not account for Maddie's absence. Something more sinister had happened to her, he was certain. They'd check Portland, they'd check Augusta. But I could tell, right from the get-go, they were focusing their biased and ignorant investigation exclusively on Nate. The detective even started on me. What was I doing on prom night? Had I seen the girl, Maddie? Had I aided and abetted in a crime? Newspaper reporters were sniffing around, rifling through the trash. A TV station sent a van over and parked outside, looking for an interview with Nate or me. Someone threw a brick through the front window. Someone fired a gun at the garage. Maddie's mother hissed at me like a cat outside the supermarket. Strangers spat at me in the street. My clients canceled appointments, and my staff at the surgery resigned. Maddie's body parts were mostly found strewn about the woods near our house, along the riverbank, and wedged between rocks on the trail behind the nearby transfer station. Maddie's head was impaled on a railing fence near the town pond. With her remains discovered so close to our house, it only intensified the scrutiny. I kept Nate inside, fearing a lynching. Not that he had any interest in going out. Where would he go? What would he do? An itinerant was discovered living in a squalid camp in the woods on the south side of Bald Mountain. A creep, a hermit. His hovel was part hidden by a cave and a clump of gnarled hemlock. And the nearby forest floor was surrounded by scraps of animal fur and bones, grisly, rotting offal. He was a wild man in his 50s who'd been stealing from cabins and campsites, trapping animals in the woods. He'd been living in the woods for perhaps 2 years. A charred piece of Maddie was found in his campfire. Case closed, but not completely. I waited a little while until things had died down a bit, until Nate seemed capable of grasping my concept properly. He seemed slow to understand. then outright confrontational. Nate was repulsed by the idea. What kind of madness was this? His own stepfather? Did I not understand how truly fucking evil this idea was? What had possessed me? What kind of man would do that? It was wrong. It was sick. He wanted nothing to do with it. He would denounce me. I confiscated his phone. He tried to leave the house, and I was forced to fight him to the living room floor, where I subdued him with sprayed triple drip that I used at the surgery to anesthetize livestock. When he came to, he was unyielding. There was no arguing with him. He would not see reason. I explained to him that it was too late anyway. In for a penny, in for a pound. There was no going back now. But eventually, I gave up arguing. Better to seek forgiveness than permission. I dosed him up for surgery. Once Maddie's arm was properly unfrozen, it turned out to be a pretty good match in terms of skin tone and musculature, though perhaps a bit smaller than I would have liked. Her blood type was compatible with Nate's, and the nerve endings and blood vessels were clean and undamaged. It would be a microsurgery marathon, but I was confident that I could perform the operation without any help. Perhaps I was never meant to be a parent. Nate seems to have adjusted reasonably well, though I don't see much of him these days, because it's best to keep him locked in his bedroom. Such rage in one so young. It can't be the arm, because to the casual observer, it looks quite passable, though a bit pale. And I know the operation was a brilliant success, because he recently hurled a can of Coke at me from the far side of his room and nearly knocked me unconscious. So vicious and accurate was the throw. Perhaps the melancholy is hereditary, but perhaps it's that twisted, scarred, and scowling face. Who knows how that might affect a young person? He only has one expression, and I sense that it makes him unfit for an independent life. Nate has one friend, another loner type, a gaming buddy called Jeremy, who'd came around once to help Nate fix his computer. He and Nate had some kind of falling out. It occurs to me that Jeremy has a very passable smile, the ghost of old Jeb Brown. Childhood memories of walking home from school on Halloween Day, cool breezes under overcast skies, the scratching of dried leaves on the pavement as the wind pushed them by. They crunched under my feet and made a swoosh, swoosh sound as I walked through them. When I got home, I raked them up into mounds and cannonballed into them with a splash like crunchy water. My old Labrador retriever with his gray face would find the energy to join in the fun, pouncing on top of me with a vivaciously wagging tail. The neighborhood was always decorated for fall. There was nothing creepy or scary at all. Hay bales and scarecrows peppered the subdivision along with the old, dried-up corn stalks. Every house had a jack-o'-lantern. We'd spread out old newspaper over the table to carve my pumpkin, cutting off the top. I'd scoop out the sticky fruit and separate the seeds. Mom would wash the seeds and salt them up before baking them in the oven while I cut out triangular eyes, a nose, and a goofy smile with only a few teeth. A candle was always placed in the center, giving the pumpkins a ghoulish glow. Homework was done with haste. The shower was taken early. Dinner was served before dark. My costume was never anything fancy. A plastic character's suit with a hard-to-see-through plastic mask that was held on by a thin rubber band. Yet, I was proud of my costume, excited to be for one night the character I chose, all ruined by an overly concerned mom who demanded I wear a jacket. The streetlights came on and the subdivision filled with kids accompanied by adults. There were vampires and princesses, robots and witches. Some costumes were homemade, some were store-bought, some were extravagant, and some were cheap. None of us kids cared. It was Operation Candy. My parents released me like I was a hungry jackal looking for a carcass to feed from. Mom would always stay home to hand out the candy, while Dad double-timed it to keep up with me as I ran from house to house. The Fambros' house was always a good one. Their mom would dress up as a silly scarecrow, much like the one from The Wizard of Oz, and sit out on the front porch. She would ask us if we wanted a trick or a treat. If you answered trick, she would do cartwheels or sing and dance, something funny to entertain us kids. I'd pick trick just for a laugh. The Bedwells' home was my favorite. On their porch, they had a scarecrow they called Old Jeb Brown. It was made of denim overalls and a red and black plaid flannel shirt stuffed with straw, boots for feet, gloves for hands, and a jack-o'-lantern for the head. Inside the head, they put a speaker. Mr. Bedwell would sit on the couch inside and wait for trick-or-treaters to walk up and then scare them. Even though I knew it was coming, he always managed to scare me. They would always invite us in and tell us the story of Old Jeb Brown. Old Jeb once owned all the land the subdivision was built on. For many years, he lived a reclusive lifestyle on the edge of town. He rarely accepted visitors, and never when they were unannounced. He built a rickety barbed wire fence around his property and posted signs that read, "No trespassing. Violators will be shot on sight." He posted those about every 50 yards or so, according to the story. People, for the most part, took that warning seriously. However, every Halloween, there were those few who would bang on his door and yell trick or treat. Old Jeb would greet them at the door with a rifle in hand. People would go scurrying away. Jeb would always fire a warning shot to let them know to never come back. Late one night, on Halloween, 1953, a group of teens felt it was their place to teach Old Jeb a lesson in politeness. They snuck up his driveway, threw a flaming bag of poo on his porch, banged on the door, and hid. Jeb never woke to put out the flaming bag, and it caught his porch on fire. The teens who were hiding in the shadows ran off. Jeb died in the house fire. Mr. Bedwell went on to tell us that the following Halloween, those kids went missing, and that they weren't the only ones. There have been cases of missing teens on Halloween over the decades. He believes it was the ghost of Old Jeb Brown exacting revenge on bad kids on the anniversary of his death. As a young kid, the story did a good job of scaring me straight. But when I turned 13, it was just a bunch of malarkey. At that age, I hit a growth spurt and was too big to trick or treat. The little things like jumping in the leaves, carving jack-o'-lanterns, and the magic of autumn were lost on me. Frankly, I hated the season because it meant school was well underway. That year, Halloween fell on a Friday, and two of my friends stayed the night at my house. They told me there were other ways to have fun on Halloween than trick-or-treating. We waited until my parents went to bed. We grabbed toilet paper, all the eggs we had, and a couple ball bats. We snuck out of the house late that night. We found a neighbor's house with no lights on and threw toilet paper in their trees, covering it. We then egged their car using half the eggs we had. Then we destroyed their decorations and smashed their mailbox. A light came on in the house and we took off running, dodging behind another house so we wouldn't get caught. We found it all exhilarating, laughing at our antics. We took a shortcut through the yards to the opposite street, Mr. Bedwell's street. My friends saw old Jeb the Scarecrow and immediately wanted to ruin it. I told them I didn't want to mess with that house, that I knew the guy, but they didn't want to listen. They started with the toilet paper, just like the last place. Then they moved on to egging the front of his house. My one friend, Jimmy, grabbed a large landscaping stone from Mr. Bedwell's yard and threw it through his bay window. They turned to run, but Jimmy didn't get away. Old Jeb jumped up and grabbed him. Me and my other friend, Ricky, screamed in fright, but were not about to leave our friend. We started hitting the Scarecrow with the bats, but the bats didn't faze it. By then, the lights were on in Mr. Bedwell's house. He was furious, but ran outside to help Jimmy. The Scarecrow knocked Mr. Bedwell down and ran off with Jimmy. We chased old Jeb all the way to the graveyard. There, Jimmy started sinking into the ground, and the Scarecrow fell into a limp pile of clothes and straw. We grabbed a hold of Jimmy and pulled with all our might, but something stronger was pulling him down. We screamed for him to hold on, but the dirt was rising up over his face. His hands slipped from our grasp, and he was gone. We didn't have time to mourn or dig. The Scarecrow stood back up, alive, and stomped towards us with intent. We scrambled to our feet and ran, but not fast enough. Old Jeb caught Ricky and started dragging him down to the grave. I grabbed Ricky in a bear hug, hoping to keep him above the soil, but I started to sink as well. I let go of Ricky and climbed out. I looked at Ricky. I saw terror in his eyes, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to end up like him and Jimmy. I was scared, so I ran, and I didn't look back. When I got home, I quietly snuck back inside and went to my room upstairs. I looked out the window, and there it was, staring up at me. I sat on my bed watching it. It never moved. Not until the sun came up and it collapsed into a pile of straw and clothes again. 30 years later, and I still have to lock myself in my house every Halloween night. The ghost of old Jeb Brown sits outside and waits, noises from the wardrobe. I was crying when Mummy came to tuck me in for the night. Come on, Jamie, my love, dry those tears away. And please, let's not have any more of that silly nonsense about monsters in your wardrobe again tonight, she whispered, stroking my cheek. You know how cross Bill gets about it. Bill, my stepfather, a horrid man, always shouting at me for one thing or another. How I wish he and Mummy had never met. It was only since he had come to live with us that the scary noises had begun. But they are real, Mummy, I swear to you. I hear them. She sighed and stood up, padded over to the wardrobe and opened the door, revealing a small closet packed with my clothes on hangers, which she shuffled from side to side. See, sweetheart, only your clothes in here. There's nothing at all to be frightened of now, is there? I swallowed as hard as I could and managed a tiny little shake of my head. Bill stood watching at the door. He narrowed his eyes, giving me one of his mean sideways looks, and told me that if I disturbed them again that night, I would have to stay inside my room the whole of the following day. Mummy was watching me, so she didn't see the expression in his eyes. He never does it when she's looking. She smiled, kissed me again, and walked over to him. "Look, we'll leave your nightlight on for you, my darling," she said. "Good night now." It was my shivering that woke me. It was exactly 3 o'clock. I am sure of that because I heard our grandfather clock in the hall downstairs chime 3 times. I was ice cold. My duvet had tumbled to the floor and my fingers and toes felt numb. Outside it was ever so windy and raindrops were hammering against the window pane. I liked to keep my curtains open so I could see the man in the moon when he smiled at me. That night, though, I couldn't see him at all. The clouds were hiding him from me. I reached down for my duvet and wrapped it around me, blowing on my fingers to warm them up. That's when I heard it, the rattling of someone fiddling with the wardrobe doorknob. I longed to shout for Mummy, but I knew Bill would be angry if I disturbed them. Instead, I slowly pulled the pillow over my head and tried my best not to listen, but it was no use. Then came a familiar sound. My wardrobe door always creaked when you opened it slowly. I could tell that it was edging open, little by little. You couldn't mistake those short staccato creaks as the door jerked. It had to be the monster, and tonight it was coming out to get me. Normally it stayed inside the wardrobe. My heart began hammering in my ears so loudly, I remember being terrified that it would hear. Curling myself into a ball as tightly as I possibly could, I squeezed my eyes shut and bit down on my lip to stop myself from crying out loud. I remember tasting the blood as it trickled into my mouth, but I still didn't dare move an inch. Eventually, the door stopped moving, and I heard a shuffling of something brushing against wood. Peeping through my fingers, I was just about able to make out a human shape in the dim glow of my nightlight. A smallish figure was standing at the bottom of my bed, staring at me. I could hardly believe it. The monster was no bigger than me. But the thing was, it was pure evil. I just knew. I think that was when I wet the bed in terror. I couldn't help myself. But I couldn't let it know. I remember the sensation of warm liquid spreading down my legs and hoping that if I simply refused to budge, the horrid monster might not find out. Maybe if I recited the Lord's Prayer to myself, it would go away and leave me alone. It stayed there, watching me for ages, whilst I prayed with all my heart for it not to hurt me. Eventually it hissed, "It's time!" Then it stomped over to my door, cracked it open, and slipped out onto the landing. When I heard it knocking on my parents' bedroom door, I almost had heart failure. My stepfather would be furious. It hammered on the door again, and then I heard Bill groan and ask in his cross voice what the hell I thought I was up to. Suddenly, their bedroom door crashed open and slammed against the wall. What I heard in the next few seconds were the worst sounds I had ever heard in my entire life. First, there was a scuffling, and I heard Bill swear out loud. After that, there were lots of heavy crashes, followed by a kind of gurgling and a piercing shriek that sounded like Mummy's voice. Afterwards, I heard her screaming, and screaming. There were more bangs, then a few resounding thuds and weird moaning noises. And still, the screaming didn't stop. What could I do? I wanted to run and help Mummy, but how could I? Paralyzed by fear, I jammed my fingers hard into my ears to block out her screams. After what seemed like ages, there was silence. Utter silence. Not a sound. I tell you, that deafening silence was 10 times worse than the screaming. I then watched, horrified and open-mouthed, as the monster crept stealthily past my bed without so much as a single glance in my direction, wrenched the wardrobe door open, and stepped inside. It wasn't until it had pulled the door firmly shut with a click that I felt able to move. My pajama bottoms were still soaking wet, and now they felt yucky and cold, but I didn't even care. I jumped up and shot out of my room to see what the monster had done. It had hurt Mummy, I was certain. I had to help her. I spotted Bill first. He lay sprawled face down in the entrance to their bedroom. I didn't care two hoots about Bill, but where was Mummy? I needed to find Mummy. I leaped over the motionless form that had been my stepfather and slipped to my knees in a dark red, sticky puddle of gooey stuff, slowly expanding across the parquet from underneath his head. It was gross. I wiped my hands clean on my pajamas as I struggled to my feet and gazed around. The room looked like a scene from one of those scary murder movies Bill liked to watch on the TV. There she was. My dear mother was slumped sideways, half in, half out of the bed. Her frilly white nightdress was crimson. Her beautiful hazel eyes were wide open, still full of shock, her mouth gaping in a now silent scream. A huge kitchen knife protruded from her throat. I recognized it. It was the sharp, shiny one from the back of the kitchen drawer, the one Bill always used to carve the lamb on Sundays. As gently as I could, I gripped the smooth brown handle of the knife and tried to lever it out of her poor, lifeless body, but it was ever so difficult to do. When it finally came free, there was an awful slurping noise and more blood trickled down her neck. I fell backwards and let the knife drop to the floor. The coppery smell of all that blood was suddenly overpowering. I think that must have been when I began to scream. I was still screaming when the police broke down the door, having been alerted by Mr. Wilson, our next-door neighbor. I very quickly learned that, just like Mummy and Bill, they didn't believe there was anything or anybody in the wardrobe. Even to this day, nobody believes a word of what I say. It has become unbearably hot in this room. I start to feel skittish and wipe my sweaty palms up and down my jumpsuit legs to prevent my knees from jiggling up and down. It is made of scratchy nylon material. Horrid orange color, too. My jaw clenches tight. "Why doesn't anybody believe me, doctor?" I whisper through gritted teeth. That's all I can remember. I swear to God I have not invented anything. It is honestly what happened on the night my mother and that man were killed. My hands ball themselves into fists. I have learned this is not considered good behavior, however, so I force myself to uncurl them, finger by finger, and carefully place both my rigid hands, palm down, and fingers outstretched on my lap. Tears are flowing, dripping from my chin to my chest. I let them fall, but they begin to cause the cloth to become clammy, and it sticks to my chest. Feels like blood. God, I can't stand it. My left eye twitches and I begin to rock back and forth. My throat is dry. I feel myself slipping. Dr. Simpson is staring at me. "All right, James. I think that is more than enough for today," he says, removing his spectacles and placing them with his pen and pad on the small table at his side. "You've done well. This is fine progress we have made this afternoon. I believe our sessions are finally getting somewhere." He then smiles and reaches for my hand. I'm sweating, shaking, still sobbing. "I'm proud of you, James. This is the first time in the 11 years you've been in here with us that you have actually mentioned these sentiments of ambivalence towards your stepfather. It is excellent that you are beginning to admit and evacuate any feelings of pent-up hatred you have been suppressing all this time." He hands me a small plastic cup and presses a button on his pager. "Here you go now. Take your meds. Look, the nurse is here to escort you back to your ward. I'll see you for our next session, same time next week. Venus buried. The girl in the graveyard is your best friend, so you take her home. The night is a bruise between you, a blotch of rogue in the passenger window. the color of fruit left out to fester. The body pries at her seatbelt, a finger, then two. The radio echoes static. The body shuffles in her seat. You study the face, the similar slice of jaw, the nose humped from where a baseball had hit her at 12, just slightly off center. The skin like a rain-licked plastic bag, the stink of musk and sulfur. You want to look away, but you cannot. She's so beautiful. Even like this, your headlights rake warbled slits through the dirt road, a yellow like jaundice. Your hands are stiff from the cold, your lips cracked. The girl beside you is dead, and you are bringing her home. 4 days ago, you'd stepped into a hardware store and emerged with a shovel sturdy enough to lift a life on. 4 days, you'd spent digging dirt in your own backyard yard until loam muddied under your fingernails and erratic holes split garden beds like the mouths of greedy beasts, until you could sift through soil with your eyes closed, with a hand bound. 4 nights you had laid in your bed staring at the pockmarked ceiling, wondering what it felt like to burn alive. Now, the shovel beats dull against the skin of your trunk, your hands gripping the steering wheel like a throat you're trying to silence. The body turns, dawn bleaching the salmon gray of her skin. The left eye slips from its socket, and she pushes it back in with the heel of her hand. She smiles, head lolling like a marionette's. "Sorry, baby." Her voice comes out strained. "I wasn't expecting company. I'm sure you understand." In a sickle of citrus moonlight, Adeline Marcus smiles up at you with shell-pale gums. Adeline Marcus died on the 31st of October and was buried a week later, the date on her gravestone a month shy of her 18th birthday. In the court, the boys would claim it was an accident, that they didn't know she was inside. For better or worse, you believe them. The fingers striking out matchboxes, the beer cans constellating the sidewalk. A prank gone too far. The wrong place, the wrong time. It doesn't have to be on purpose. She didn't have to be home. The coroner ruled it suffocation, but all you can imagine is flame like a stiff palm striking over and over. Adeline had crawled from the mouth of the home on her hands and knees. She was dead by the time she reached the pavement, her Sunday dress singed up to her knees. The dress you knew well enough. Either way, the boys were left with 25 to life, and the Marcuses were left with a dead daughter, a ring of ash like chalk on the pavement. You were left with a misplaced guilt like hunger, a guilt like an Ouroboros, choking on the tail, swallowing the head, eating yourself alive and being unable to stop, even as it consumes you. Because this wasn't the sort of thing that happened to good people. You watch water curl down your shower drain, carrying with it mortuary makeup, kaleidoscopic insects and jasmine bubbles, strings of dirt stretched out like sinew. The body's head rests on her knees, vertebrae needling through her back like a line of molars. The electric lights wash her green, dark veins rooted under brittle skin. She turns her face to the shower head and picks at the powdery sediment under her fingernails. The shower floor is a mess of grit when you think of a child scooping up the sand. You turn the heat up until it scalds and scrub mildew from the base of the shower door. You think, if you can only get everything clean, everything will be all right. She turns her head and looks at you through eyes obscured by glass paneling. She says, "It's not as bad as all that. I don't even think I felt a thing." But she says it through lips the color of spoiled plums, so the sentiment doesn't ring true. You lift threadbare towels from the bottoms of your linen closet. You walk 3 times around your block and return to a corpse sat on your sofa like she has nowhere better to be. There are ants in your sugar bowl. You try to remove them, lift their crystal-knotted bodies on the prong of a fork, but they slip between the gaps, and you are left with a mess bigger than when you started. Tea-brown sludge bleeding from thoraxes and the stink of vinegar. There's a dead girl on your sofa, but let's focus on the ants in your sugar bowl, the way they thread through cysts of white like veins on a leaf, like the capillaries that run through the skin of your face. You make tea anyway. You add too much milk and sit cross-legged in front of the body. She stares at you. You stare back. The two of you drink, and ribbons of watery milk pour clean out her trachea, the gaping hole in her chest. But she doesn't stop drinking until you do. "You're not looking at me," she says. "Not really." "Yes, I am." You twist your hands in the shag carpet. "Aren't I now?" "No," she says. "You're not." You leave your teacup on the floor, saucer and iris of yellow, and go upstairs. You take 2 cigarettes from the carton squashed on your father's desk, and then think better of it. Press down with your heel until tobacco dissipates into the tawny carpet. You change your bedsheets twice, eggshell white. No, gray with peonies. You make a second cup of tea. When you get back to the room, the body is still there. You are looking at her. You are not looking at her. "Do I disgust you?" she says. "No." She shakes her head, dark hair plastered to her shoulders like reeds. "No more than I always did." "You need to sleep," you say. "Baby." She tilts her head to one side. "Sleeping is all I've ever done." The last time you saw Adeline Marcus alive was in the back of a stranger's car, parked on a stranger street, with the taste of a stranger's tequila fresh between your lips. You were never two built for parties, so the outcome was a pair of girls who looked like they were playing dress-up, blousey dresses with sleeves like a nun's, thrift store necklaces noosing your necks, shoplifted lipstick which she hid beneath her mattress, more wax than pigment. But in the citrus peel of streetlights, in the low trill of distant music, the two of you looked beautiful. She had her legs curled under her and was sitting sideways in the back seat, her hand resting on your knee and the other palmed against the window. A song on her lips that you couldn't quite place. You were too close, but it was night, and everyone was inside and drunk. And sometimes we all need to feel closer than we should be, to lose ourselves a little. The song melted on her lips, swallowed into the limp press of salvia and booze, and you said something like, "I think I should go home now." And she said something like, "Have another drink." And so you did. You let her pour the liquor into the flimsy mouths of red plastic cups and watched her swallow. She said, "You're so pretty." And you said, "I think you should stop." And she said, "Just let me say that one thing." And you wanted to say, "Stop fucking looking at me like that." And you wanted to say, "I want to crawl inside you and make a life for myself in the city of your mind." And you wanted to say, "Let's just be quiet. Let's just not talk. Let's just not ruin a good thing by telling the truth." Instead, you pushed open the passenger door, stumbled out onto the skin of vein blue sidewalk. "I'm going home now." The body lays with her back to your bed, hands worming in the floral sheets, chestnut hair spilling across her throat, past the ballpoint pen-marred bedposts, over the gray skin of her forehead. You are thinking about the silken mouth of a coffin. You are thinking of how she looked when you pulled her from the rose mouth of heaven. The radiator hums. The lace curtain bellies your open window. She rolls over onto her side, slots her hands together like pieces of a decaying jigsaw puzzle. You still can't even look at me. Her mouth moves too slowly, words like chewing gum. Why am I here, Bet? What's it for? There are pink crescent moons on the bed of your palms from the bite of your nails. She pulls her knees to her chest, and a bone cracks. She pulls her knees to her chest, and a molar tumbles from between her keyhole lips. You can only love me when I'm not here. You can only love me when there's nothing left to love. You press your cheek to the cool spread of linen beside her. You listen to the steady beat of your heart, the way you can feel it in your fingertips, entirely singular. Don't tell anyone, you say. Did you want it to die with me, Bet? She shifts, and her hair falls against the nape of your neck. Were you glad it was silenced? Don't tell anyone, you say again. She sighs, lays herself back down so you're face to face. Crooked nose, eye pulling from its socket, the onset of gray-green decay leaving her jaw. The smell of soil and rot and cicada-heavy nighttime. Who could I tell? She brushes your hand. I'm not really here. And suddenly you can imagine it is your fists splitting beer cans in two like overripe fruit. It is your fingers on the matchbox, your fingers striking out. But you both know the house would still be on fire, and you both know you'd leave alone. You take her hand. You put your face in the crook of her neck and beg forgiveness from a ghost. October surprise. Oi Choi, show me your tongue. That's what you got to say to a suspected Serp. They can't hide their forked tongues even if they've gotten better at copying just about everything else. Ask anyone, and they'll tell you. I mean, it was all over the feeds, this little old man. He could have been anybody's grandpa, except he was living under a stolen ID and preying on small critters near a school zone. But luckily, some Final Front guys caught him, and when they backed him into a corner, out came that freaky Serp tongue. And that's just one example. Who knows how many more are living among us? But we're not going to sit idly by and let it happen. Sometimes all it takes is a few good men to make a difference. That's why I answered the private invite on my holo. Want to do something about the Serps? That flashed once, then gave the when and where before the letters scrambled and dissolved. It was fast, like 3 seconds, probably to test our memories and observational skills. We're meeting at the shuttered Lindbergh Library in a part of Southside Apex that hugs the wall along the stretch. And I get there way before sundown to show them I know how to do recon. I'm wearing my urban camo and blending in with a piece of plasteel that hasn't been added to the wall yet. I count 4 guys go into the alley behind the library. Not a one sees me, but I'm not following until it's time because I'm precise that way. Oi Choi. Some guy I didn't see go in sticks his head out the alleyway. His head is like a creep block with 2 slits, and those slits are looking right at me. I stiffen, because maybe he's going to disrespect me and ask to see my tongue, but he just jerks his big head to tell me to get moving. In the alley, he rolls aside a dumpster to reveal a hole. I see his black shirt and the crossed hammers over stars and bars on his forearm. That means he's Final Front, so I know I can trust him. We walk down to the library basement, where floodlights and empty shelves line the wall. The 4 other guys are down there, plus 2 Final Front guardsmen and some cyberpunk chick fiddling with a gunmetal box on a fold-out table. When they jam our feeds and make us hand over our holos, I know this is some Alpha Code Red shit, and we're in it for real. Outstanding. The guy with the big head kicks aside some books that got burned after everyone realized the feeds were better, then stands in front of us. Everyone straightens up without being told. You can call me Sergeant Bill, but don't you dare call me sir, he says, kind of cool and strict at the same time. Now, you may not know us personally, but we know you. Every one of you has been carefully selected, but if you don't agree, if you have any doubts, then there's the door. No? Then let's begin. You men have been selected to infiltrate the SERPs and reveal the enemy within. My heart hammers in my ears, then skips a beat when Sergeant Bill says the mission pays double time with a bonus for each SERP we expose. Wow, Choi. I mean, I'd do it for free because I love Apex City. But the double time pay with bonuses is how I know Chancellor Ike must have our back on this mission. He's generous and understands the working man like that. It's like Chancellor Ike's in this basement with us, but we can't say his name. I mean, we can, but no one does out of respect. He's already doing so much while the Weepsters and SERP deniers attack him from all sides, so we can't say his name without giving him something else to deal with. Now, you might ask yourself, what about training? Sergeant Bill says. There'll be none of that. Training will give you away in this scenario. That makes sense. SERPs are trying to be just like us, so they won't know the difference if we be ourselves. Sergeant Bill continues on and takes the words right out of my mouth. I nod and see others doing the same. We all get it, even though none of us knows each other. I bet Chancellor Ike planned it that way through the final front. He's holding a rally all the way on the other side of Apex tonight. That's smart. Plausible deniability to keep us all safe. I watch the Sarge talk and know we're tuned into the same frequency. Choi's a badass. I bet if the basement ceiling caved in, he'd be able to stop it with his head. He's solid as a post, and I bet he's seen some shit. That makes me feel better about how easily he spotted me outside. I imagine already being out in the field and passing him in the street while I'm undercover. We won't so much as look at each other because we're professionals, but we'll both know that we're part of an unspoken brotherhood. There will be no medals for me because I can't talk about what I do, not even to my wife when I have one. She'll respect that I don't talk. Maybe I'll even meet my future wife on a mission. I glance at the cyberpunk chick still messing with the box on the table. She's actually kind of hot. Then, the basement gets pretty quiet. Sergeant Bill is looking at us like he expects someone to say something. One of the other guys, a redhead with too many freckles, raises his hand. What if the SERPs want us to eat someone's cat, sir? What did you call me? See Sergeant. Anyone here want to help him out with that question? You eat the damn cat, I say. What did you say? The Sarge gets in my face, but I stare straight ahead and repeat it. Did you hear that? He asks cat question guy. Then Sarge repeats my words like he's in awe. Even better, he gets all of the other guys to repeat it. Yeah, Choi, I was made for this. Then we get serious. Sergeant Bill says we all gotta make a temporary sacrifice. I guess we all knew it was coming, but it's still hard to hear it. We're all gonna have to get SERP tongues before going out into the stretch. Cat question guy looks at me, maybe hoping I'll speak up and give him an excuse to chicken out. Nope, not going to happen. We stand there in silence until the moment's gone. Sarge tells us we'll get out normal tongues back once the mission's done. Then he drops some inside knowledge that we didn't know. The SERPs don't talk when they're alone among their own kind because they're not advanced enough to have their own language. They only know how to copy. We trust you, but we can't have you slipping up and talking when you make first contact out in the stretch. For that reason, you're going to have to get your vocal cords paralyzed. Sounds worse than it really is, and it's even more temporary than the tongue mods. No reversal needed. Now, if you go see that lovely lady over there, she'll get you sorted. Any volunteers? I double time it over to the cyberpunk chick because I don't want any of the other guys making a first impression before I do. She's wearing blackout contact lenses, so it's like I'm staring into her soul when she looks up at me. Hey, so it's really simple. You put your face in there. She rotates the gunmetal box my way. The top and side facing me are open, and the inside is white foam with a face-shaped hole. Then you stick your tongue in there. She points to a black hole that lines up with the mouth of the white face hole. There's something down there, something with metal legs. Having second thoughts? It only hurts for a second. It's nothing compared to this. She opens her mouth and shows me her tongue stud. I run my eyes over her metal, leather, and tattoos to let her know fear is the farthest thing from my mind right now. I don't know. Will I still be able to do this? I do the old 3-leaf clover tongue trick and let her get a good look while the other guys line up behind me. I stare into her designer eyes. Someone behind me coughs, but I keep staring until she gives a slow smile. Then I put my face in the box. She puts her hand on the back of my head and strokes my hair. We'll probably tell our kids about this moment. She's right. It's quick, more like a millisecond, an intense burst like a laser slicing my head down the middle. But then it's gone, and whatever's in that hole sprays something icy and soothing into my throat. Her hand stops stroking my hair, and I take my head out of the box. Another, heavier hand lands on my shoulder before I can get her hollow. It's Sergeant Bill, and he's guiding me back up the basement stairs while I blink away the white spots in my vision. "Let's check you out here, soldier," he says, when we're next to the hole that leads back out into the alleyway. It's dark now, so he pulls out a pen light and a hand mirror to give me a look. "Oi choi." I try to say it, but my new tongue just flaps around. That's when I remember about the frozen vocal cords. Sarge plays it cool and gives me a moment to fight down the panic. I take another look. There's not even a speck of blood, and a serp's tongue isn't like a snake's tongue. It's more like two smaller human tongues that can move in different directions. If I hold it still, I can barely tell the difference. Sarge is right. It'll be easy to reverse. I close my mouth and look at him. "Congratulations, you're first out in the field, but we have a special surprise before your stretch deployment. We couldn't tell you until you reach this stage, but you get to meet him. Tonight, Chancellor Ike." He doesn't have to say the name. As he gives me the details of how I'll get to the rally and what happens after, my eyes start to tear up. I clear my throat, but even that doesn't make a sound. "Hey, you know how to use one of these?" Sergeant Bill asks as I'm about to leave. He hands me something that feels light and solid at the same time. That's a ghost gun, undetectable and 3D printed to match the color of your skin. You get just the one shot, but you might need it if things go sideways with the SERPs. Keep it close. "All right, soldier, I'll leave you to it." He shakes my hand before going back to the basement. Even if I could talk, I wouldn't have the words. The risk Chancellor Ike is taking for us goes beyond words. He didn't have to, but he did, and he's letting me meet him with a loaded weapon on my person. That's what makes him great. His ability to completely trust someone in a world filled with lies. I take a steadying breath, then remind myself to breathe only through my nose from here on out to keep my SERP tongue hidden. The cruiser is already waiting there in the alley, just like Sergeant Bill said it would be. Nothing fancy, but it hovers smoothly enough over the south side's cracked pavement, then picks up speed on the north side's shiny streets where the Weepster elites live in high-rises and pretend that SERPs aren't flooding our city with sacramine. The driver doesn't say a word or even look at me. He just hands me my rally ticket and lets me off a few blocks from the Apex arena. I show my VIP ticket, and the metal detector is quiet like me as I zip through security. At first, I'm a little paranoid about someone trying to start a conversation with me, but it's easy to just clap, nod, and smile with my mouth closed after Chancellor Ike comes out and starts talking. My seat's in row 9, close enough to the stage that I can hear his voice boom before the speakers farther back in the stadium amplify it. He looks even bigger in real life. He makes this packed stadium feel small. And it's not like I think he's a god. I know he's not perfect, and he'll be the first to say so. But that's why he's our last chance. He's not afraid to say what's on everyone's mind. Then, right in the middle of Chancellor Ike's story about how he made the Weepsters pay their fair share, someone 2 rows ahead of me stands up from his seat. It seems like the wrong time for a standing ovation. Plus, he's facing the wrong way. He climbs on his seat to put himself even higher over the seated crowd. That's when I see it's Cat Question Guy from the basement. One of his eyes is swollen shut, and the other eye is bugging out of his skull, searching the stadium for something behind me. I turn my head to look back and see others doing the same. Chancellor Ike can't help but notice. Sir? Sir, do you need assistance? Do you need someone to teach you how to sit? This guy. Look at this wacko. Are you lost? Seats are for sitting, sir. Cat Question Guy starts climbing over the other people to get out of his row. People are recording him on their hollows because that's what people do. Idiot. He's going to compromise the mission. We need some assistance over here. The speakers carry Chancellor Ike's voice across the stadium. Cat Question Guy takes off up the aisle, then runs back toward the stage as security comes down the aisle after him. Oh shit, does Cat Question Guy also have his own ghost gun? Maybe he's a double agent. Maybe the Serps are smarter than we think. More security is closing in on the stage from both sides, but they'll never get there in time to save Chancellor Ike. I put my hand on the ghost gun in my pocket and get to my feet. But then I see Sergeant Bill at the head of security sprinting down the aisle. Gun! Gun! He's got a gun! Sarge draws his own piece without breaking stride and drops Cat Question Guy with a quick burst to the chest. Everyone around me has dropped to the floor with their hollows hanging overhead to still take in the action. I realize I'm still on my feet. Sergeant Bill glances at me. I look away and start sinking to the floor to keep my cover, but something stops me. He's standing at the end of my row, and those slits in that big block of a head are still trained on me. Now, his gun is too. Check the tongue on the one in the aisle, he says, without taking his eyes off me. I think he was signaling this guy. My hand is still frozen on the ghost gun in my pocket, and my words are frozen in a mouth made to betray me. Sarge plants his feet wide and shows me his teeth. Oi Choi, let me see that tongue. October surprise. Oi Choi, show me your tongue. That's what you got to say to a suspected Serp. They can't hide their forked tongues, even if they've gotten better at copying just about everything else. Ask anyone, and they'll tell you. I mean, it was all over the feeds, this little old man. He could have been anybody's grandpa, except he was living under a stolen ID and preying on small critters near a school zone. But luckily, some Final Front guys caught him, and when they backed him into a corner, out came that freaky Serp tongue. And that's just one example. Who knows how many more are living among us? But we're not going to sit idly by and let it happen. Sometimes all it takes is a few good men to make a difference. That's why I answered the private invite on my holo. Want to do something about the Serps? That flashed once, then gave the when and where before the letters scrambled and dissolved. It was fast, like 3 seconds, probably to test our memories and observational skills. We're meeting at the shuttered Lindbergh Library in a part of Southside Apex that hugs the wall along the stretch. And I get there way before sundown to show them I know how to do recon. I'm wearing my urban camo and blending in with a piece of plasteel that hasn't been added to the wall yet. I count 4 guys go into the alley behind the library. Not a one sees me, but I'm not following until it's time because I'm precise that way. Oi, Choi. Some guy I didn't see go and sticks his head out the alleyway. His head is like a creep block with 2 slits, and those slits are looking right at me. I stiffen because maybe he's going to disrespect me and ask to see my tongue, but he just jerks his big head to tell me to get moving. In the alley, he rolls aside a dumpster to reveal a hole. I see his black shirt and the crossed hammers over stars and bars on his forearm. That means he's final front, so I know I can trust him. We walk down to the library basement where floodlights and empty shelves line the wall. The 4 other guys are down there, plus 2 final front guardsmen and some cyberpunk chick fiddling with a gunmetal box on a fold-out table. When they jam our feeds and make us hand over our hollows, I know this is some alpha code red shit, and we're in it for real. Outstanding. The guy with the big head kicks aside some books that got burned after everyone realized the feeds were better, then stands in front of us. Everyone straightens up without being told. You can call me Sergeant Bill, but don't you dare call me sir, he says, kind of cool and strict at the same time. Now, you may not know us personally, but we know you. Every one of you has been carefully selected, but if you don't agree, if you have any doubts, then there's the door. No? Then let's begin. You men have been selected to infiltrate the SERPs and reveal the enemy within. My heart hammers in my ears, then skips a beat when Sergeant Bill says the mission pays double time with a bonus for each SERP we expose. Wow, Choi. I mean, I do it for free because I love Apex City, but the double time pay with bonuses is how I know Chancellor Ike must have our back on this mission. He's generous and understands the working man like that. It's like Chancellor Ike's in this basement with us, but we can't say his name. I mean, we can, but no one does out of respect. He's already doing so much while the Weepsters and SERP deniers attack him from all sides, so we can't say his name without giving him something else to deal with. Now, you might ask yourself, what about training? Sergeant Bill says. There'll be none of that. Training will give you away in this scenario. That makes sense. SERPs are trying to be just like us, so they won't know the difference if we be ourselves. Sergeant Bill continues on and takes the words right out of my mouth. I nod and see others doing the same. We all get it, even though none of us knows each other. I bet Chancellor Ike planned it that way through the final front. He's holding a rally all the way on the other side of Apex tonight. That's smart. Plausible deniability to keep us all safe. I watch the Sarge talk and know we're tuned into the same frequency. Choi's a badass. I bet if the basement ceiling caved in, he'd be able to stop it with his head. He's solid as a post, and I bet he's seen some shit. That makes me feel better about how easily he spotted me outside. I imagine already being out in the field and passing him in the street while I'm undercover. We won't so much as look at each other because we're professionals, but we'll both know that we're part of an unspoken brotherhood. There will be no medals for me because I can't talk about what I do. Not even to my wife when I have one. She'll respect that I don't talk. Maybe I'll even meet my future wife on a mission. I glance at the cyberpunk chick still messing with the box on the table. She's actually kind of hot. Then, the basement gets pretty quiet. Sergeant Bill is looking at us like he expects someone to say something. One of the other guys, a redhead with too many freckles, raises his hand. "What if the Serps want us to eat someone's cat, sir?" "What did you call me? Sergeant? Anyone here want to help him out with that question?" "You eat the damn cat," I say. "What did you say?" The Sarge gets in my face, but I stare straight ahead and repeat it. "Did you hear that?" he asks cat question guy. Then Sarge repeats my words like he's in awe. Even better, he gets all of the other guys to repeat it. "Yeah, Choi, I was made for this." Then we get serious. Sergeant Bill says we all got to make a temporary sacrifice. I guess we all knew it was coming, but it's still hard to hear it. We're all going to have to get Serp tongues before going out into the stretch. Cat question guy looks at me, maybe hoping I'll speak up and give him an excuse to chicken out. Nope, not gonna happen. We stand there in silence until the moment's gone. Sarge tells us we'll get out normal tongues back once the mission's done. Then he drops some inside knowledge that we didn't know. The Serps don't talk when they're alone among their own kind because they're not advanced enough to have their own language. They only know how to copy. "We trust you, but we can't have you slipping up and talking when you make first contact out in the stretch. For that reason, you're going to have to get your vocal cords paralyzed." Sounds worse than it really is, and it's even more temporary than the tongue mods. No reversal needed. "Now, if you go see that lovely lady over there, she'll get you sorted. Any volunteers?" I double time it over to the cyberpunk chick because I don't want any of the other guys making a first impression before I do. She's wearing blackout contact lenses, so it's like I'm staring into her soul when she looks up at me. "Hey, so it's really simple. You put your face in there." She rotates the gunmetal box my way. The top and side facing me are open, and the inside is white foam with a face-shaped hole. Then you stick your tongue in there. She points to a black hole that lines up with the mouth of the white face hole. There's something down there, something with metal legs. Having second thoughts, it only hurts for a second. It's nothing compared to this. She opens her mouth and shows me her tongue stud. I run my eyes over her metal, leather, and tattoos to let her know fear is the farthest thing from my mind right now. I don't know. Will I still be able to do this? I do the old 3-leaf clover tongue trick and let her get a good look while the other guys line up behind me. I stare into her designer eyes. Someone behind me coughs, but I keep staring until she gives a slow smile. Then I put my face in the box. She puts her hand on the back of my head and strokes my hair. We'll probably tell our kids about this moment. She's right. It's quick, more like a millisecond, an intense burst like a laser slicing my head down the middle. But then it's gone, and whatever's in that hole sprays something icy and soothing into my throat. Her hand stops stroking my hair, and I take my head out of the box. Another, heavier hand lands on my shoulder before I can get her hollow. It's Sergeant Bill, and he's guiding me back up the basement stairs while I blink away the white spots in my vision. "Let's check you out here, soldier," he says when we're next to the hole that leads back out into the alleyway. It's dark now, so he pulls out a pen light and a hand mirror to give me a look. "Oi, Choi." I try to say it, but my new tongue just flaps around. That's when I remember about the frozen vocal cords. Sarge plays it cool and gives me a moment to fight down the panic. I take another look. There's not even a speck of blood, and a Serp's tongue isn't like a snake's tongue. It's more like two smaller human tongues that can move in different directions. If I hold it still, I can barely tell the difference. Sarge is right. It'll be easy to reverse. I close my mouth and look at him. "Congratulations. You're first out in the field, but we have a special surprise before your stretch deployment. We couldn't tell you until you reach this stage, but you get to meet him. Tonight. Chancellor Ike. He doesn't have to say the name. As he gives me the details of how I'll get to the rally and what happens after, my eyes start to tear up. I clear my throat, but even that doesn't make a sound. Hey, you know how to use one of these? Sergeant Bill asks as I'm about to leave. He hands me something that feels light and solid at the same time. That's a ghost gun, undetectable and 3D printed to match the color of your skin. You get just the one shot, but you might need it if things go sideways with the SERPs. Keep it close. All right, soldier. I'll leave you to it. He shakes my hand before going back to the basement. Even if I could talk, I wouldn't have the words. The risk Chancellor Ike is taking for us goes beyond words. He didn't have to, but he did. And he's letting me meet him with a loaded weapon on my person. That's what makes him great. His ability to completely trust someone in a world filled with lies. I take a steadying breath, then remind myself to breathe only through my nose from here on out to keep my SERP tongue hidden. The cruiser is already waiting there in the alley, just like Sergeant Bill said it would be. Nothing fancy, but it hovers smoothly enough over the south side's cracked pavement, then picks up speed on the north side's shiny streets where the Weepster elites live in high-rises and pretend that SERPs aren't flooding our city with sacromine. The driver doesn't say a word or even look at me. He just hands me my rally ticket and lets me off a few blocks from the Apex arena. I show my VIP ticket, and the metal detector is quiet like me as I zip through security. At first, I'm a little paranoid about someone trying to start a conversation with me, but it's easy to just clap, nod, and smile with my mouth closed after Chancellor Ike comes out and starts talking. My seat's in row 9, close enough to the stage that I can hear his voice boom before the speakers farther back in the stadium amplify it. He looks even bigger in real life. He makes this packed stadium feel small. And it's not like I think he's a god. I know he's not perfect, and he'll be the first to say so. But that's why he's our last chance. He's not afraid to say what's on everyone's mind. Then, right in the middle of Chancellor Ike's story about how he made the Weepsters pay their fair share, someone 2 rows ahead of me stands up from his seat. It seems like the wrong time for a standing ovation. Plus, he's facing the wrong way. He climbs on his seat to put himself even higher over the seated crowd. That's when I see it's Cat Question Guy from the basement. One of his eyes is swollen shut, and the other eye is bugging out of his skull, searching the stadium for something behind me. I turn my head to look back and see others doing the same. Chancellor Ike can't help but notice. Sir, do you need assistance? Do you need someone to teach you how to sit? This guy. Look at this wacko. Are you lost? Seats are for sitting, sir. Cat Question Guy starts climbing over the other people to get out of his row. People are recording him on their hollows because that's what people do. Idiot. He's going to compromise the mission. We need some assistance over here. The speakers carry Chancellor Ike's voice across the stadium. Cat Question Guy takes off up the aisle, then runs back toward the stage as security comes down the aisle after him. Oh shit. Does Cat Question Guy also have his own ghost gun? Maybe he's a double agent. Maybe the SERPs are smarter than we think. More security is closing in on the stage from both sides, but they'll never get there in time to save Chancellor Ike. I put my hand on the ghost gun in my pocket and get to my feet. But then I see Sergeant Bill at the head of security sprinting down the aisle. Gun! Gun! He's got a gun! Sarge draws his own piece without breaking stride and drops Cat Question Guy with a quick burst to the chest. Everyone around me has dropped to the floor with their hollows hanging overhead to still take in the action. I realize I'm still on my feet. Sergeant Bill glances at me. I look away and start sinking to the floor to keep my cover, but something stops me. He's standing at the end of my row, and those slits in that big block of a head are still trained on me. Now his gun is too. "Check the tongue on the one in the aisle," he says, without taking his eyes off me. I think he was signaling this guy. My hand is still frozen on the ghost gun in my pocket, and my words are frozen in a mouth made to betray me. Sarge plants his feet wide and shows me his teeth. "Oi choy, let me see that tongue. Phenomenal." I knew the other three who'd come on board, but had never made the formal acquaintance, nor, from what I'd learned, would have cared to. The other guys, no idea. I use guys loosely, without gender assignment, which isn't a horrible thing. People more than ever are just kinda people, despite the plucky can-do dementia of the Proud Boys and Rollers in Florida and guys like my two new friends, who seem to swing dicks with random glee. Today's vast uncertainty liberates me from the subconscious rules of attraction or aggression and the traps and travails that result from getting it wrong or acting on the primordial. Not so much with the other guys. There was no context for humanity, much less the equipment or accoutrement that might tell me who I wouldn't bang with a regulation 10-foot titanium pole or drunkenly flail at outside a sketchy bar at 1 a.m. on the ass end of town. And in fact, that's the last thing my bros were doing before we became fellow contestants in Intergalactic Survivor. Or more literally, ultimate, naked, and afraid. This was what I'd call a Kate McKinnon scenario. All coot-coots and prune shoots, and, in this instance, shriveled roots. Nothing like full disclosure to douse male bravado, or, to be frank and with all due to the fourth member of our little party, to make you reconsider why you considered busting skulls the ideal nightcap. For at least one of the bros, it was karma swooping out of the central Illinois skies with an extraterrestrial roofie. And the night, or morning, I guess, was still young, it would appear. Under abnormally normal conditions, or at least those I'd recorded a dozen times, I'd expected to come out of this with a little invasive poking and prodding, and, if I won the lotto, a blank spot in the tape over the P&P. Unlike my pals, I naturally was more intrigued than terrified. Now, I had a sense I'd have preferred the scheduled entertainment. It looked like something out of a Nickelodeon award show, except, unlike Demi Lovato or Derek Jeter, nobody went home with a trophy and green pudding in their coot-coot or prune shoot. All honesty, the mangled thing on the seamless luminescent floor seemed an improvement over the rest of the crew now milling about. Nobody leapt out of the crowd howling at the heavens for their lost comrade. Nobody wrapped tendrils or tentacles or whatever shit around anybody's throats. Dead guy could have been the office douchebag for all I knew, but nobody's metaphorical shorts seemed particularly in a bunch. Why I got chosen, I have no idea. There's nothing about me that projects leader vibes, except maybe the glasses, which would have meant nothing in a galaxy likely minus a lens crafter's or, seemingly, eyes. Maybe I was the only one of the Millington foursome who wasn't projecting pheromones, blood, Jägermeister, and Stetson original flavor. Maybe there was something their species found comfort in the lingering essence of ranch corn nuts. I'd left the fucking bag in the front seat of the Honda in the tractor turnaround 100 feet down the road. The body and all attendant slime had been removed efficiently from the tiny chamber, which from the lights and panels and sensors filling one wall was probably the flight deck, which may have made dead Guy the captain. Made sense, because from the corridor outside, there simply was no entrance, and Captain Demised's residual slime had pooled and congealed where the invisible door had been opened presumably by somebody with the codes or the neural interface or whatever sci-fi horseshit these nerds used. I'd been a true crime podcaster since WMIL had fired me for hiding my stash under the audio board and lifting the gear essential to launching a successful true crime podcast. My host this evening extended a tentacle or tendril, and I tensed as it touched my hand. I momentarily considered that I'd been selected for all the wrong reasons. Then I sensed something like the warm vibration of an electric blanket kicking on, and something in my skull registered it as a reassuring gesture. Nobody's mad. We just want to get to the bottom of things before we rip the flesh from all your bones and cast you still breathing into Jeff and Elon's airless playground. After a moment, the tendricle withdrew, and I sensed a change in the ambient frequency. Broadcaster's ear, some might say, as I loaded up my bobbleheads in WMIL/WILFFM/WCNT's circular drive. The FCC had given up long ago. My senses had only heightened after I swapped the pot for the pod. So, I finally spoke. What do we do here? A ripple in a fold where we normally keep our belly buttons was the only sign it hadn't already moved on to Denny's versus IHOP. Then my hand buzzed, and I felt something like a venti double espresso hitting my brain. I glanced down, and I realized E.T. had plastered some tech on me. Teeny tech, like that thing above Kate Winslet's lip, I couldn't look away from during the entire run of Mayor of Easttown. They probably had better Best Buys in the Andromeda, because as I pondered my hand, it kicked things off. It wasn't a question. No Wookiee purr or calming Christopher Nolan, Jodie Foster Babelfish Siri for dummies. It was a sensation that sparked the right cerebral pathway in the rough form of a question. Hey, don't ask me. Aside from the abduction thing, I got nothing against you guys. I were you, I'd call a staff meeting. This was clearly an inside job. I raised a brow and a tendril twitched. Unless? It responded with an abrupt hum with a rising inflection. I mean, I'm just saying. The hum raised an impatient decibel. I had that effect, and I grinned despite the sketchy circumstances. Let me know if you heard this one. A vampire, a werewolf, and a ghost walk into a bar. I'd never really cared for the paranormal. As a kid, I'd cheated curfew more a few times to catch Art Bell and his syndicated late-night imitators. The original podcasters, you might say. Most all I ever got from it were sleepless nights because I was neither as cynical or worldly as I imagined. And then Stephen E. Meyer. The notion of seductive heart-of-gold vampires and soulful werewolves who only need an empathetic tummy-adjacent rub was flaming Doritos for emotionally miswired adolescent girls and the hormone-addled teen wolves and bloodsuckers sidling up for a peek up the skirt. I actually found Mom one day sneaking one of those Twilight cinder blocks over socks and towels, suspiciously leaning into the basement washer. That may well have been my cannabis origin story. The day WMIL and I parted company, our morning zoo boys interviewed some hot university multimedia prof who held that, like opinions and assholes, every moron today has a podcast. Though she told me to fuck off as I stopped to chat on my way out of the building to torture my intern escort, the prof's other words inspired me to take up my own mic, even with the station call letters scratched into it. I had two major obstacles to podcasting fame. Well, two with several bullets. Every asshole with an opinion and an Amazon account indeed had a true crime cast, and many of them didn't have a half-dozen public intoxication pot busts on their sheet while trying to pull intel from the keepers of the sheets. And the local cops turned out to be better at solving midnight murders and geocaching body dumps than I'd assumed. Still, I lucked into a couple of low-life, low-radar prospects with the necessary quotient of lurid stupidity. Stuff that could be dressed up with a little NPR polish and a moody/broody royalty-free score. So help you actually care about folks whose absence might not have registered for a couple weeks, or whose departure might have been a low-grade net positive. I had a cousin in the Millington PD crime lab who cared about such folks even without the synthesized violins, and she tossed me a couple lightly gnawed, long-discarded bones. 5 episodes into Dollar Store Death, I hit connective tissue. 3 months before, Yelene Krautzer, a clerk at the dollar station on Main, had closed up for the night and trudged the brightly lit 3 blocks north to Bar Road, and the moonlit 4 blocks west to the trailer park behind the community college. When Yelene failed to show up for another day of gassing Mylar balloons for backyard birthdays and early releases, and calculating infinite multiples of $1.25, you expect them to change the signage every time the supply chain breaks? Then failed to show 3 more shifts. The manager called the MPD for a welfare check, and the MPD determined Yelene had indeed made it home. Keys on the coffee, Mountain Dew table, screen unlatched with the storm door ajar to loudly let Judge Judy and Kelly Clarkson out, and a single streak of crusted blood on a couch pillow. Blood matched Yelene, but according to Cousin Chris, also contain a second salivary DNA contribution that couldn't yet be traced. I'd seen Krautzer's Facebook wall and found it hard to buy anybody was slobbering over her, and given Yelene's known circle, that she was swapping blood for spit with anyone who didn't have ink or DNA on file with the MPD, the county, or the Pontiac or Joliet men's clubs. There was one more anomaly, as Chris put it. Canine hair on Krautzer's contaminated couch, breed unknown, or more likely a Heinz 57, but nowhere else on the slightly funky premises. The neighbors hadn't noticed any suitors around that or any other night, much less with a voyeuristic black lab mix in tow. But my sense was the ancient and self-medicated of Paradise Park were running on observational fumes. The Dollar Station crew testified Yelene enjoyed a lively sex life, if not precisely in those terms. 2 guys in particular haunted the station, hanging at Krautzer's register for near shifts at a time, creeping the clientele in irritable silence and binging energy drinks and paydays to keep the manager at bay. Jason Truitt looked something like what might happen to a lesser Jonas brother if Proactive ever went belly up and he made his rent under cars at the Lightning Lube a block up. Chad Salem had landed a sewage wheat gig, moving bongs and vape juice at the smoke shop between one of Millington's bustling new dispensaries and the Dunkin', which had seen a spike in wholesales and parking lot collisions with the neighborhood cannabis trade. There theoretically might have been one brain and something hinting at a personality between them. Chad showed greater finesse telling me to go fuck myself, but they were working off roughly the same script. And like a lot of Gen Plussers today, romantic rivalry seemingly had not damaged their broship. There was little leverage to get either one on air, and I needed one or the other if I were going to play anybody besides the Dollar Station's horny off-brand soda vendor as prime suspect. Then, in a flash of inspiration, I visited the Lightning Lube and vape in big red neon, marketing geniuses they were not, for one last pitch. I left with a pair of fuck yous, a half can of Rockstar Pure Zero, and a grease-slick, empty chug of Mountain Dew Ultra Midnight. Cousin Chris accepted my gift with a sigh, and as she added me to the bottom of her to-do list, I took one more peek at the presumed crime scene photos. I'd missed the big black brick next to the trailer keys on the coffee table. As I'd intended, Chad put 2 and 2 in his missing piss drink together, and, I assume, helped Jason with the math as well. I wasn't surprised when I got the call a few days later, but the voice on the other end floored me. I agreed to meet her anyway, thinking maybe I could save the cast even without a body, or more accurately, the absence of one. What could go wrong at midnight at the soccer fields at the edge of town, right? She was waiting in the shelter by the bike trail. No other cars in the lot filled every summer Saturday with type A millennial moms and dads, but her profile was crisp in the single overhead the city'd installed to protect nocturnal joggers from their impulsive cardio. I got a little wary when I realized her rodent features were outlined in blue rather than municipal fluorescent orange, but I continued across the trampled, damp grass. They sacked me halfway across the first field, one from each side. I didn't need Chris to tell me who'd left dog hair on Yelene's house, and as fourth Jonas ripped at me, I felt a sharp stab in the neck, and momentarily caught Chad's bloody grin as he dove back in for a second gulp. I came to face and yelped like a little girl. The little girl the other little girls are too embarrassed even to beat up at recess. Yelene clearly needed some rare beef and leafy greens. Her narrow face was pallid, juiceless, her eyes dead. Unlike Kristen Stewart, however, the washed-out eyes were somehow also penetrating and expressive, and Yelene was smiling broadly, if in that Anthony Hopkins way right before he dishes you up with beans and cheap wine. And whatever Benicio del Toro, Robert Pattinson STD she'd caught from the fellas had had a miraculous effect on her new, neutral palette complexion, and there was an energy that had to be more than just mainlining Rockstar or Do. "Someday you'll want to thank me," she whispered in a frosty puff as my nods pulled up somewhere around my kidneys. "I appreciate your kind words, but a simple fuck off is thanks enough." Yelene rose and then shimmered, is the only word I can put to it, and I spotted the guys waiting at the edge of the asphalt. Then she popped back into focus and the former dollar store. Besides, everybody's got a podcast these days, like assholes and, It's okay. She had a few thousand years to work on her metaphors. The musketeers jumped when I entered, probably because I'd never learned to knock first and really didn't need to stand on ceremony anymore. I could feel, if not see the fat and sassy moon beyond the hull in a way I never had, and I was still itching under the hoodie and jeans. "Fuckers letting us go?" the ingloriously naked Serena demanded. "Everybody went home for the night." I smiled. "Coming in for a landing in a few. Said we could let ourselves out." "You think to bring our shit brain?" Randy sneered. The poet of the group, and the guy who'd been the prospective star of my next crime cast until fate had intervened likely on Serena and Cody's behalf. Cody poked at a spot to the left of his bristly lips, then did the calculations and shifted to the right. "You got a little green shit on your... Oh. Yeah," I sighed. "Oh." My favorite John Mulaney routine is the one about the girlfriend who, having seen Ray, declares that she didn't care for the whole dead brother thing. Neither did Ray Charles, Mulaney notes. Science doesn't care how you feel, nor the universe, nor whatever shit's stowed in the drywall in the back of the closet. Still don't care for the paranormal, or the extra normal. We somehow believe aliens are telepathic, cosmically attuned, all-powerful, all-knowing. But once I realized their highfalutin tech didn't come with a polygraph, I knew they put their metaphorical pants on one figurative leg at a time. Just flesh and slime like the rest of us, only better in science and vehicle design and highly susceptible to our special brand of terrestrial batshit. Everybody loves a good scary story with a hook-handed twist, and mine was a great one. After I showed my new BFF my locked room cheat and dealt with the rest of Team Tendril, I requested a ride home and left him or it or them, I'm an ally when I can, with that sage principle of the redneck code. Tell your friends. While he, she, they, it fiddled with the GPS, I bid my bar buds a fond and final adieu, mainly to cleanse the palate. The Honda and the gear and the corn nuts were just where I'd left them. The field behind already had been stripped to stubble and earworms looking for a place to winter. A couple Fords were angled into the front of the double tap, which at the dawn's early light was dispensing biscuits and gravy and therapeutic dog hair to the guys who'd struck out on the Bright to suck up the rest of the corn and beans or shoot the shit out of stuff as they wet dreamed of being that first good guy with a gun who doesn't instinctively plug the black cashier. I was surprisingly still hangry, despite my impromptu feast, so I pulled it out of the turnaround and crunched into the gravel across East Millington. I noted for the first time the tap folks had dressed things up for the holiday with one of those 20-foot skeletons decked out in no doubt handmade biker gear. A vampire, a werewolf, and a ghost walk into a bar. Dude, the bartender called after I took a two-top as far from the Morning Fox crew moderating a literal farmer roundtable underneath. You look like death warmed over. Rough night, huh? Probably as good a punchline as I was ever going to come up with. The Spook Who Sleuths my office was darker than FDR's fireside chats and twice as smoky. That's how I like it. Keeps the clients on their toes and the spirits at bay. Name's Roxy Hart, and I'm what you might call a supernatural tomfoolery private dick. Some folks get their knickers in a twist over that last word, but in my line of work, you gotta call a spade and a detective a dick. I kicked back in my chair, feet up on the desk, pondering life's great mysteries. Like why dames always fall for the wrong guy, or how spam manages to be both a wartime delicacy and the bane of future generations' inboxes. That's when she walked in, a real looker, the kind that'd make Betty Grable green with envy. Are you the paranormal investigator? She asked, her voice shakier than a GI on his first day in boot camp. I tipped my fedora back, giving her the once-over. That's what it says on the door, dollface. What's your tale of woe? She was a maid, worked up at the Wackerman estate. Seems the big cheese, Cornelius Wackerman III, had kicked the bucket under some hinky circumstances. As she spilled the beans, I reached into my trench coat, pulling out the ectoplasmic resonance detector, a contraption that looked like it fell off the set of Metropolis and got jiggy with a transistor radio. Whoa, Nellie, I said, as the ERD lit up like Times Square on New Year's Eve. You've got more paranormal residual energy floating around you than a seance during a full moon. I'll take the case, toots. The maid blinked, more confused than a coal miner at a debutante ball. I'm sorry. What did you just say? I sighed. Nobody appreciates the classics anymore. I said I'll investigate. Now, scram, sister. I've got work to do. As she hightailed it out of here, I gathered my gear and weapon of choice. The spectral spook zapper, patent pending. I slid it into my left inside coat pocket, right next to the lucky rabbit's foot I'd lifted off a less than lucky leprechaun way back in '47. I adjusted my tie, straightened my hat, and headed out to face the music. The Wackerman estate loomed ahead like the devil's own summer cottage. As I approached, a chill ran down my spine, colder than a G-man's stare. This joint was surely more haunted than my high school reputation after that unfortunate incident with the principal's toupee and a jar of molasses. The door creaked open before I could knock, revealing a butler so stiff he made Buster Keaton look like a Lindy Hopper. Look it up. You must be the investigator, he said, eyeing my trench coat like it might bite him. That's right, Jeeves. I'm here to solve your spectral shenanigans. Now, Where's the grieving widow? I need to pick her brain like it's the last rationed can of beans. He led me to a parlor where a dame sat, draped in black like she was auditioning for a walking shadow puppet show. The widow Wackerman, I presumed. Next to her stood a gardener who fidgeted more than a pickpocket at a cop convention. "Ma'am," I said, tipping my hat, "I'm here to get to the bottom of your husband's untimely departure from this mortal coil." The widow's eyes narrowed. "I beg your pardon. Are you quite all right, Miss Hart, Roxy Hart, and I'm as right as rain on a duck's back, sugar. Now, let's get down to brass tacks. What's the skinny on old Cornelius's last night on Earth?" Before she could answer, a vase floated by. Casual as you please. As the vase left the room under its own power, the gardener yelped like he'd just seen Rita Hayworth in the flesh. I smirked, reaching into my coat. Well, well, well. Looks like this shindig's about to get interesting. Hold on to your Homburgs and pillbox hats, ladies and gents. Roxy Hart's on the case, and we're gonna paint the town red, or maybe ectoplasm green. From the parlor, I drifted down the hall into the dead guy's study, my gumshoes quieter than a Nazi spy at an Allied command post. The room, swankier than a Hollywood big shot's ego, held more books than the Library of Congress after a shopping spree. All right, let's see what my little friends have to say about this joint, I said, muttering and whipping out the ethereal essence evaluator. It looked like a love child between a Geiger counter and a waffle iron, but it could sniff out evil spirits faster than a bloodhound on a catnip bender. The EEE started clicking like a tap-dancing telegram operator. Well, 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 I drawled. Looks like old Corny was into some hinky business. More nefarious vitality here than a ghost's laundromat. As I poked around, the widow Wackerman slunk in, looking like she'd just lost a staring contest with Medusa. "Have you found anything, Miss Hart?" I targeted her with a look that could strip paint. "Listen, sugar, I'm gonna level with you. Your hubby was dabbling in some dark arts darker than a black market coffee bean. Care to spill the giggle water on that?" She blinked like a burlesque dancer under a spotlight. I'm not sure I understand your vernacular, Miss Hart. Are you implying Cornelius was involved in the occult? Bingo, doll face. Give the lady a cigar and a one-way ticket to the Copacabana. I paused, cocking an ear. Did you hear that? A low moan shimmied through the room and steadily grew louder than a foghorn with indigestion. Suddenly, a book flew off the shelf, missing my noggin by a hair's breadth. "Duck and cover, sister," I yelled, shoving the widow behind an overstuffed armchair. I whipped out my spectral spook zapper. "All right, you ectoplasmic mook, let's dance." The room erupted into more chaos than a Keystone Cop's reel. Books flew, curtains flapped, and somewhere a ghostly voice belted out a tune that'd make Stephen Foster, look it up, roll in his grave. I blasted left and right, my zapper illuminating the place like the searchlights of Alcatraz during a prison break. "Take that, you translucent troublemaker," I hollered, nailing a particularly nasty wraith. It vanished with a pop, a whimper, and a puff of green smoke, leaving behind a stink that reeked like burned toast and regret. As the dust settled, I turned to the widow, who was peeking out from behind the chair like a groundhog with stage fright. "Your house has more spirits than a speakeasy on Saturday night, Mrs. W. You mind telling me what your husband was up to?" She flapped her gums faster than a gossip columnist with a spicy scoop. Turns out, Cornelius had been trying to summon some big bad from the great beyond, looking to strike a deal for power and wealth. Classic mistake. You'd think these rich types would learn, but they always want more. I needed more hot poop, so I cornered the butler in the kitchen. He was stiffer than a starched collar in January, but I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. "All right, Jeeves," I said, leaning in close. "Time to sing like a canary at the Met. What do you know about the boss's late-night activities?" He gulped, his Adam's apple doing the jitterbug. I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Miss Hart." I smiled, all teeth and moxie. "Come off it, buddy. I've seen more convincing acts in a high school production of Hamlet. Spill it, or I'll have my friend here do some redecorating." I patted my zapper meaningfully. The butler's resolve crumbled faster than a sandcastle in a tsunami. He babbled about secret meetings, strange chants, and a final ritual that went sideways. Corny had bitten off more than he could chew, and whatever he summoned had bitten back. Armed with this info, I headed to the basement. If this was a horror movie, the audience would be screaming at me not to go down those stairs. But hey, a dame's gotta do what a dame's gotta do. The basement was darker than a Mickey Finn's intentions, and twice as disorienting. My ectoplasmic resonance detector was going haywire, its needles spinning like a drunken ballerina. Come out, wherever you are," I called, voice echoing in the gloom. "Let's have a little chat, mono a monster." That's when it appeared, a shape darker than a moonless night, with more tentacles than an octopus family reunion. It roared, a sound that'd make Sinatra lose his voice in envy. I stumbled back, fumbling for my zapper. "Well, ain't you uglier than a bulldog chewing a wasp? Let's see how you like a taste of Roxy Hart's special sauce." I fired, the zapper's beam flooding the underground hideaway with more light than a night raid over Berlin. The creature howled, tentacles flailing. For a moment, I thought I had it on the ropes, but one of those slimy appendages knocked the zapper from my hand, sending it skittering across the floor. The monster loomed over me, its maw gaping like the entrance to the underworld's least welcoming honky-tonk. I gulped, backing up against the wall. "Well, sweet cheeks," I muttered to myself. "Looks like this might be your last curtain call." But as the saying goes, it ain't over till the fat lady sings. And honey, I was about to belt out an aria that'd knock this palooka's socks off, if it wore any. As the tentacled terror approached, I knew it was time to pull out my ace in the hole. Or should I say, my ace from the hereafter. "All right, you overgrown calamari," I growled. "You want to dance? Let's cut a rug." I closed my eyes, concentrating harder than a code breaker at Bletchley Park. Suddenly, the air around me shimmered and sparked like a Technicolor light show at Emerald City. The monster hesitated, its tentacles freezing mid-flail. If it had eyebrows, they'd have been raised higher than a cat's back at a dog show. "That's right, Buster," I said, smirking, my voice echoing with an otherworldly resonance. "You're not the only spook in this rowdy scene." My body glowed hotter than the Chicago steel mills working overtime for the war effort. The creature shrieked, sounding like 1,000 nails on a chalkboard orchestra. "What's the matter, ugly? Can't take the heat?" I taunted, floating a few inches off the ground. "Let me introduce myself properly. The name's Roxy Hart, class of 1945, and I don't mean high school, sweetheart." With a gesture that would have made Houdini green with envy, I let fly with a wallop of phantasmal pizzazz that made the basement look like Coney Island brought Times Square to a hot date on a Saturday night. The monster didn't stand a chance. It dissolved faster than a sugar cube in hot coffee, leaving behind nothing but a stench of low tide and broken dreams. As my glow faded away and I floated onto solid ground again, I heard gasps behind me. Turning, I saw the widow, the butler, and the gardener gawking at me like I was Eleanor Roosevelt doing the jitterbug in her studded leather underwear. Now that's a picture. "Close your mouths, folks," I drawled. "You'll catch flies." The widow stepped forward, her eyes wider than dinner plates at the Ritz. "Miss Hart, what? Who are you?" I straightened my fedora, which had somehow stayed on through the whole shebang. "Like I said, doll, I'm Roxy Hart, paranormal investigator extraordinaire. I just happen to have a bit more personal experience with the other side than most." "You mean you're the gardener stammered. "A ghost?" "Well, butter my biscuit and call me impressed," I said, winking. "Been haunting this side of the dirt since 1945, when a Jerry and I did the Razor Fandango in Kraut Country, and I missed a step. Figured I'd put my unique secret agent talents to good use, so I started solving cases no living gumshoe could crack." The butler, looking paler than usual, which for him was quite a feat, cleared his throat. "But how are you solid and a woman?" I shrugged, straightening my trench coat. "A dame's gotta have some secrets, Jeeves. Let's just say I've picked up a few tricks since shuffling off this breathing business. Now, about your late boss." I explained how Cornelius had accidentally offed himself during his little summoning ritual. The big bad he'd called up had been more than happy to stick around and make itself at home, feeding off the fear and confusion of the household. "So, that's the skinny," I concluded. "Case closed, and your house is officially deghouled. My bill will be in the mail, and don't worry, I accept most forms of payment in this realm." As I turned to leave, the widow called out, "Miss Hart, will we see you again?" I paused at the door, tipping my hat with a smirk. "Sugar, in my line of work, you never know where or when I might pop up. Just keep your eyes peeled and your Ouija boards handy." With that, I sauntered into the night, my form slowly fading like mist in the morning sun. Another case solved. Another day. Well, not lived, but you get the picture. In this town, the streets are dark, the dames are dangerous, and the dead don't always stay put. But as long as there are phantoms causing trouble, Roxy Hart, the ghostly dick, will be there to crack the case and save the day. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a hot date with eternity, and maybe a cold glass of spectral gin. This ghost detective's work is never done. But hey, that's the breaks when you're the spook who sleuths. Call of the Merrow. Having loaded ice chests full of freshly caught crab into the back of his muddy 4x4, secured his 16-foot red and white Orkney strikeliner to the trailer attached to the vehicle, and returned to the pier to retrieve the nylon mesh crab pots left behind, Miles Burke caught sight of something bobbing in the water, an object he hadn't noticed there before. He recognized it at once as an old-style lobster pot, its slats covered in thick brown seaweed, its netting encrusted with barnacles. Mud and silt clung to its frame, and plant matter dangled from its corners as though it had been buried at the bottom of the creek for decades. I was confused at first about where it could have come from, but then remembered the trouble he'd had hauling up the last of his pots. It had gotten snagged on something at the bottom of the creek, and he'd struggled to yank it loose. Maybe this Pirates of the Caribbean type relic had come loose too, then drifted ashore in the wake of his boat's churning engine. Whatever the case, he shrugged it off as insignificant following his initial fascination and busied himself stowing the rest of his gear. Someone else could discover it, a local fisherman or curious child. It would make their day and give them something to talk about in this sleepy, coastal town. His eyes kept flicking to it as he worked, however, a curiosity growing that couldn't be quelled. It was probably nothing, but if the cage was as old as it looked, it could be of value. This notion nagged at him, so after depositing his cleaned and empty crab pots in the belly of the boat, he returned with a long-handled ice hook and used it to fish the cage out of the foam. It was cold and wet, slimy to the touch, but that didn't bother him. Hitching the hook to his belt, he turned the cage this way and that, confirming it was vintage, made of wooden slats, rope netting, and leather hinges. He identified the location of its circular trapdoor, but was unable to access it due to the dense accumulation of muck clogging it up. Now it was in his hands. He decided it couldn't be as ancient as he'd thought. The wood didn't smell or feel rotten. It had clearly been in the water a long time, and there was something inside. He could hear it slosh about when he shook it, but he couldn't find a chink in its algae armor to see what. Curiosity mounting, he held the cage tight against his chest and plunged the fingers of his free hand into the kelp. The fronds felt rubbery, springy, and refused to come away, instead seeming to hug the pot tighter. After a few moments, Miles became frustrated and glared at the brown stuff in annoyance. This was not how seaweed worked. The seagulls overhead seemed to agree. Circling restlessly, their shrill cries grew louder, more obnoxious, as though urging him to get the cage open and reveal its contents, or abandon it and leave it where it belonged. He winced beneath their barks, resisting the urge to tell them to shut up. Voices reached his ears, and he turned to see a pair of wizened old fogies in tweed flat caps and woolen jumpers making their way down towards the pier. He wasn't in the mood for small talk, so he hurried to the Land Rover, returning the ice hook to the boat as he passed. The cage was his now, as was whatever was within, and he didn't want to explain himself to locals. Placing the cage like a slumbering infant on the newspaper that occupied the passenger seat, he pulled his door shut and started the engine. Out of habit, he tapped the screen of his phone, which was clutched in the arms of a holder secured to the windscreen. 6 missed calls, 6 more on top of the 5 that morning. He didn't have to check to know they were from his wife, his father, his solicitor, all wanting to know where he was, what he was doing, when he was coming back to the circus his life had become. He'd come to Doonbeg to escape it, for one last indulgence of his favorite pastime before the strikeliner. His pride and joy was taken away. One weekend on the water, fishing and hauling up crab, that's all he wanted. A chance to be free before it all fell apart. The noose had been tightening for weeks, finally forcing him to come clean to Kiara about the failed real estate projects he'd been hiding. The multiple mortgages, the unpaid contractors, the suing investors, forced him to admit it all in shame. The coastal resort he poured everything into, the one he thought would save his business, had collapsed before it could break ground. He'd stretched too far, betting that demand for luxury condos would return. It hadn't, and now, with every call he ignored, the threats were growing. Bankruptcy, foreclosure, fraud investigations, failure, exposure, humiliation. Tomorrow he'd return his attention to his woes and decide what he was going to do. Tomorrow, or the day after, or maybe the one after that. It wasn't like he had options. He was facing criminal charges and the repossession of his home and belongings. He had no control over any of it. The only thing he had any say left in was his marriage, and even that was slipping further away with each unanswered call. He had no idea what he wanted to do, fight for the love of his life or let her go. He did know one thing: Kiara did not deserve this. She was innocent. She shouldn't have to go down with his ship or be expected to support a man who cheated and lied. A loser, an idiot, an asshole. the last 3 calls had been from her, and she'd now sent 15 texts. He couldn't bring himself to read them, so he swiped the notification screen away, put the car into gear, and started driving. He waved as he passed the old men, a polite gesture, but they only glared, his clean-shaven jaw and sanitized looks marking him an outsider, not someone they needed to acknowledge. Or maybe it wasn't that, because country folk were generally friendly. Maybe it's that they somehow knew what he'd taken, something from the creek that wasn't his. He shook his head at the guilt creeping over his shoulders, insinuating he was doing something wrong. It didn't make sense, but every glance at the cage deepened the unease in his gut. There was something about it that put him on edge, made him feel that it wasn't his to take, and it filled him with a familiar kind of excitement. "It's just junk," he said aloud, though he couldn't stop thinking about how the seaweed wouldn't come away from the slats and how something mysterious lay within, which was most likely sludge but might be treasure, something that would help with the mess he was in, something that might help Sierra. Driving away from the inlet, following the cliffs towards Dolemore and the quiet B&B he'd booked into, he busied himself with fanciful musings of what kind of treasure the cage might hold, the undulating sea dominating the horizon to his right, gently rising slopes carpeted by fields of purple orchids on his left. It was a magnificent day, all azure skies, cotton wool clouds, and the scent of salty sea spray in the air. He couldn't have asked for more. It was exactly the calm he needed before the storm clouds over his life unleashed their fury. The drive to Ayrton House took 20 minutes, and soon he was maneuvering his vehicle, boat and all, onto the gravel-covered parking lot at the side of the stone-clad building. He was the only guest that weekend, so space for his car and trailer wasn't a problem. He took his phone, the harbinger of inescapable doom, and climbed out, swinging around to the passenger side to reclaim the cage. He took time to wrap it in paper so it wouldn't make a mess when he went in, then crunched across the gravel to the door. He was eager to attack it with his knife, cut away the seaweed, and get inside, so he was hoping not to bump into the proprietor, a lovely old dear named Mary Shaw, who could talk like there would never be a tomorrow. He wasn't lucky. "Ah, there you are," Mary said, shuffling from the dining room as he entered the hall, a bright smile on rosy cheeks, dead carnations clutched in pudgy hands. "Nice day for it. Catch anything interesting?" "Not really. I was only after crab today. You can have some if you like. I'm only going to drop it at the market." He kept moving, casting her the briefest of smiles as he made his way to the stairs and started up. "That would be lovely. My Trevor used to catch crab every weekend, before he fecked off to Australia with that floozy. I was telling you about her, wasn't I? Her and her 10 ex-boyfriends, and my Trevor to be number 11 because he couldn't resist her charms. What's that you have there?" He was on the 5th step when she spotted it, and he checked to make sure he hadn't dripped dirt on her carpet. "Just an old lobster pot. Found it at the pier. It's ancient, but might be worth something if I clean it up. People will buy anything these days." "Dunmore Pier?" Mary suddenly looked troubled, and the smile had fallen from her lips. "What do you mean, found it?" "Just what I said," Miles replied, caught off guard by her change in demeanor and questions. "I think it was buried in the creek. I must have dislodged it." At the foot of the stairs, Mary creased her brow. "That might not be good, Mr. Burke. There's terrible legends associated with that place. A lot of people have been drawn to their deaths there over the years. It's a dangerous place. Haunted, some say. Or worse." Worse? I don't like to talk about it. It gives me the heebie-jeebies, and it sounds ridiculous. Don't laugh now, but some say the bay is cursed. Some say it's home to the Kumara, the Hound of the Sea, the Merrow. The Merrow? Miles shook his head to indicate he'd never heard of such a thing, then resumed his climb to the landing. Merman, Mrs. Shaw elaborated, eyes wide under a mop of gray curls as she started after him. You know, like a mermaid, but a man. I know it sounds ridiculous, but some believe it. There are stories of it making off with the souls of the tormented who drowned or jumped from the cliff. They say it keeps their spirits locked in cages, which it hoards like jewels at the bottom of the bay. Her wide eyes were locked on the paper-wrapped cage, one hand on the banister as she climbed, the other crushing the stems of dead flowers. That's a new one, Miles chuckled, reaching the top of the stairs. Never knew we were supposed to have mermaids in Ireland, along with banshees and leprechauns. We've some amount of fairy tales, don't we? Don't get me wrong, Mr. Burke. I'm not a believer in such things. She'd stopped halfway up to catch her breath, but continued to stare as he crossed to his bedroom door. But at the same time, you can't be sure, can you? You can't, Miles said, fishing in a pocket for his key. That could be one of them. A soul cage, one of the Kumaras. Hardly, he scoffed, guiding the key into the keyhole. He could hear her coming up the stairs again behind him, feel her eyes boring into his skull. But it's a great story, and it might help sell the thing, if it doesn't fall apart when I take off the kelp. The key turned, the lock disengaged. He opened the door. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mr. Burke. If the legends are true, it's troubled souls the Kumara craves. Wayward souls trying to escape. Sorry, Mrs. Shaw. I'm exhausted, so I'm going to grab a shower and take a nap. I might stay another night. I'll let you know this evening. Oh, and I'll bring you that crab. Hopefully it's as good as what Trevor used to catch. I'd put that back, Mary went on as he shut the door. Back where you found it, if you know what's good for you. Fuck's sake, he muttered under his breath as the door clicked shut, then rested against it and braced for more. When he heard her slippered feet slogging back down the stairs, he relaxed, placing the mucky cage on his bed and spreading out the newspaper beneath it. Jesus, mermen and soul cages. I've heard it all now. Better not be a box of bloody souls. I need something good. His heart was pounding, and he had that feeling again, that nervous exhilaration he got from doing something he shouldn't. He still couldn't explain why he felt it. He wasn't gambling with his and Ciara's future, wasn't siphoning non-existent funds from account to account or cooking books. He was just messing with some shit he'd found in the surf. It was no big deal, at all. But he still felt the need to take the edge off, so he went to his suitcase for the small paper package containing a Ziploc bag of white powder, a well-used €50 note, and half an old credit card, then spent the next few minutes at the dresser sorting it out. Once satisfied, and having wiped some residue from his nose, he took the Swiss Army knife Ciara had given him for Christmas from a cargo pants pocket and prized out its largest blade. For the man who has everything, he recalled her saying, and tears welled unbidden in his eyes. He'd had everything and never deserved it, never deserved her. He couldn't redeem himself now, even if the cage contained diamonds. But if he could make things right for her, that would give these last squandered years of his life some kind of meaning. And so, with a sharp inhalation, he knelt at the foot of the bed and started to saw. Almost immediately, he noticed it wasn't working. No matter how much he slashed, the seaweed refused to come away. He could see the blade slicing through fronds, watched them sever with his own eyes, but the slimy substance clung to the cage and refused to tear free. What the hell? He went at it harder, tightening his grip on the knife, jabbing its blade into the gelatinous sludge, stabbing, carving. What is this? And then the blade got jammed, and the knife's handle jerked out of his hand. Damn it, he said, wiping a sweaty palm on his muddy pants before reaching to take back the knife, only to see it get sucked into the seaweed and disappear. What? It was sudden and noiseless, a subtle, casual motion that seemed almost normal. Miles moved his face closer, squinted to peer through the mulch, couldn't see in. You're having a laugh. He sighed and poked his fingers into the mush where the knife disappeared. He couldn't feel it. He wriggled his fingers in further. The seaweed seemed to loosen around his hand. He twisted his wrist, and his fingers and thumb slipped inside. The seaweed seemed to shrivel up and tighten. His fingers got a hold of something solid. Then something solid got a hold of him, clamping around his hand and squeezing tight. Miles Burke. A voice seemed to issue from within. Ah! Miles cried, hugging the cage to his chest and hopping to his feet. The thing on the inside pulled, and his hand slipped in up to the wrist. Miles Burke. Jesus. A strange sensation, like aggressive pins and needles, swept through him, starting in his hand and spreading fast, up into his arm, shoulder, face. Get off. He maneuvered the cage with the arm it was stuck on, held it against his side with the other. He pulled, he tugged, he staggered around the room as he struggled, yelled and pitched forward when he felt something bite. He crashed into a wall, lifted his head, let his terrified gaze peer into a mirror. The face staring back wasn't his. Fear gripped his chest and he screamed, falling away from the monstrous visage, all doughy gray flesh, mossy green hair, pig-like eyes and moldy teeth. Give it to me. Miles could have sworn he heard it say, before he tripped and fell back, cracking his head on the corner of the dresser and coming to rest on the floor. He dreamt then, a dream like no other, a strange collection of images and sounds that made no sense. Of him lying motionless on the ground, blood painting a pool around his head. Of Mary Shaw entering the room. Of policemen covering him with a sheet and collecting powdery evidence. Of Mary driving, walking, standing at the edge of the bay, whispering into the cage, saying, "I warned you." Your tortured soul called out, and the Merrow called back. Of the cage being cast into the sea. Of the dark, murky depths of a jet-black ocean. Of the pig-eyed Kumara slithering from the depths to claim its prize, its cage now home to a fresh soul gleaming with torment, a treasure to be savored for eternity. Out for the count. A knock, knock, knock came from the top of his coffin lid. Eckhard Freud closed his eyes and gritted his teeth. One day's sleep was all he wanted. One day of peace. That damn boy would jump at the shadows of his own bat wings. Eck pushed up his coffin and glared at the boy, not even deigning to sit upright. He kept his arms crossed over his chest. Yes, Dunstan. What is it? Dunstan Greaves stood there in his PJs, holding a blanket. He shifted from one foot to the other, looking awkward. I heard a noise. Eck's eyebrows rose. He tried to keep his voice even. A noise? You woke me, Count Freud, from his slumber for a noise? Well, what kind of a noise was it? A vampire hunter coming to stake me? The village populace come to burn me? What? Dunstan looked at his feet. He prodded the floor with his toes. Well, no. It was a different kind of sound. A spooky sound. A spooky sound. A spooky Eck sat up. You're an undead creature of the night, Dunstan. You're over 300 years old. And I turned you when you were 24. You can't be afraid of every creak and groan in this old manor. And most importantly, you can't be waking me whilst I'm getting my sleep. Dunstan sagged. He looked miserable. "Kay, sorry." Echehard likewise deflated. Who could say no to those hypnotic eyes? They made him feel like a monster. "Tell me, Dunstan, what can I do to make you feel better?" Dunstan brightened a little. "Well, I guess, maybe, I could sleep in with you today, Eck?" He paused before hurrying on. "Just for today, I promise I'll sleep in my own coffin tomorrow." Echehard closed his eyes. "Beelzebub, give him strength." "Fine, fine. But just for today, I swear to the old ones that this is the last time, though." The boy started to scramble in. "Oh, thanks a lot, Eck. It makes me just feel safer, you know? I can sleep soundly, knowing you're there to protect me." Eck scooched over to the far side of the coffin. The casket maker hadn't constructed it with two bodies in mind. All right. But don't hog all the duvet. You've got your own blanket there. And leave me some of the pillow, damn it." The boy snuggled down. His breathing slowed. "Thanks, Eck. You're the best." "G'day, buddy." Echehard's grumpy exterior melted a tiny bit. He grumbled. "Well, it's all right. Good day, Dunstan." Dunstan jumped, propping himself up on his elbows. "Did you hear that?" Echehard groaned. One day, one single day, that was all he asked for. "Sleep," he groaned. "Let me sleep." Dunstan remained half upright, listening. He raised a finger in the twilight of the closed coffin. A heavy thud and scrape came from beyond the casket's walls, as if on cue. "That," Echehard frowned. He blinked away the sleep in his eyes. Yes, he had heard that. A bat of worry fluttered its wings in the dusty corridors of his ancient heart. Could Dunstan's paranoia be hitting the stake on the head for once? "What? Was it? I don't know. Eck, I think it's what I heard earlier. There's somebody else in the house. There's something in here with us." That woke him up faster than a snort of garlic. Could it be vampire hunters? He thought all the hunters had gone extinct and passed from reality into folklore and legend. He didn't believe any existed anymore. But if they did, He ought to do something. He stirred, starting to sit upright. All right, he said, running a hand over his face. You wait here, boy. I'll check it out. If there's trouble, fly away. Be careful, Ek. Ekahard pushed open the coffin lid. He slipped like liquid through the gap, letting it close without a sound, sealing the boy safe inside. Outside, in the dark, thanks to those fancy blackout blinds, Ek's senses adjusted to the house. He sniffed the room, eyes glinting like a cat's. He attuned himself to the very particles of air as they floated around him. Something shifted down the corridor. A faint blue glow throbbed. A thud, a scrape, and a moan whispered along the floorboards. Ek's teeth extended, and his sharpened nails itched for a fight. Well, bathe him in holy water. Dunstan was right. Could you say the boy was crying wolf when against all odds there was one? Sometimes the boy had unfounded fears, but this time his intuition had proved to be an ally. Ek owed him an apology if he lived to see the moon's light again. Lighter than the motes of dust drifting in the gloom, he stalked towards the disturbance. A man was standing in the grand foyer, his back turned. He had an eerie, ethereal shine and swayed from side to side. His ripped shirt dangled from him in tatters. He appeared to be speaking to someone. A human? Foolish, foolish. Ekahard pounced. The man's body offered no resistance, and Ek passed through him as though he weren't there. Cold electricity crackled over Ek's skin as he pierced the stranger's form. Ek thudded into the wall, head spinning, bewildered. He looked up at his failed would-be victim, bats fluttering in his vision. The misty surface of the man's skin strobed in the gloaming. He looked down upon Ekahard, eyes furious, face drawn in a rictus of mourning. One side of his neck was a gaping black hole from which ink-black blood had gushed and stained both skin and cloth. He raised a hand and pointed at Ekahard, wailing, "Uh-oh." Ekahard had killed this fellow the other night. He'd brought him back to their place as a late-night snack. It wasn't good for his digestion, but sometimes you had to indulge. Other ghosts apparated on either side, like unwhacked whack-a-moles. "I am Shane Abbott," moaned the ghost, "and you have wrongfully killed me. I have woken the others too." There were many. Other voices joined in a choir of the dead. Oh, so many. Oh, sweet Je. Oh, sweet Nosferatu. Wasn't that a kick in the blood-sucking teeth? The only way to get rid of ghosts was with an exorcism. And the only way to have an exorcism was with a priest. What vampire in their right mind would invite a priest into their home? They could spritz you with holy water or brandish a crucifix at you. And if the holy man did get rid of the hauntings, what then? They'd, bless the place. Dunstan's voice called out from the other room. Eck? Everything all right? Dunstan, my boy, said Eck, not breaking eye contact with the head ghost. I don't want to sound all aflutter, but I have bitten off more than I can suck here. We ought to contact the council. We need to vamp hire outside help.